illegal drug testing to radiation tests on humans, the government has been involved in a number of shady projects over the course of the years, which we'll be looking at only in today's video. Starting off this countdown, we have the transmission tests. The US government once ran a series of tests on people with disabilities and prison inmates. They thought that it was fine to do so with this demographic of people because basically they thought they were going nowhere in life and they have nothing to lose. One of the tests in the mid-1940s was quite disgusting. It involved having young men swallow unfiltered stool. They did this to see how a deadly stomach bug was transmitted. The study took place at a reformatory prison, the New York State Vocational Institution. They claimed that they couldn't just spray the germs and have the test subjects breathe it in. No. They said that swallowing it was a more effective way to spread the disease. Of course, these men were forced to do so against their will and were left traumatized. In our ninth spot, we have the malaria tests. In the late 1940s, a group of men were infected with malaria before being starved for 5 days. While being starved, some of them were subjected to hard labor. Those men lost 14 pounds within a few days. They then were treated for their malaria with a number of drugs. What's wild is that this study was always kept a secret. In fact, most studies from the 1940s to 60s were never covered by the media. And if they were, the focus was, oh my God, the government might find a cure. It's amazing the work that they're doing. The focus was never on how they were finding the cure and their poor test subject. In our eighth spot today, we have the pregnant women. In the late 1940s, a number of researchers were testing diethylstilbestrol, which is a synthetic estrogen, on pregnant women. They thought this would help women against pregnancy complications, but it sadly did the exact opposite. A number of women ended up miscarrying or giving birth to low birth weight babies. None of the women knew that they were being experimented on in the first place. If they had known, they probably wouldn't have risked it. In our seventh spot, we have the Syphilis Experiment. In the early 1950s, the government controlled a syphilis study on men in Guatemala. Their aim was to find out how syphilis and other diseases spread. Sadly, not much is known about these experiments because the government records were destroyed years after the program was shut down in 1956. What we do know, though, is that the men were exposed to prostitutes infected with this disease. But they later found that that didn't spread the infections quick enough. So they decided to inject the disease into the men. They did so by two ways. One, by making a medicine with this disease and putting it on their downstairs eggplant, or by injecting it directly into their spine. What made this worse is that there were no age restrictions to these tests, so they were targeting the young too. Some declined drastically in health. Plus, a number of test subjects were left untreated so that they could study the progression of the infections as well as the damage it would cause. In our sixth spot, we have the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project is the project that produced the world's first atomic bomb. They conducted a number of tests, including detonating a series of bombs in a New Mexico desert. They also conducted a number of tests on humans to see the effects that radiation would have on us. One of the tests included monitoring nuclear technicians for the effects of radiation exposure. The technicians had no clue that they were being studied. Some fell extremely sick. One woman even suffered from kidney failure. That's when the workers began to wonder if they were getting sick from the radiation. Later, more tests were done on humans. This time, they were injected with polonium and other radioactive elements. In the end, hundreds of people ended up being injected or fed with plutonium, which is one of the most dangerous substances in the world. Sadly, they targeted individuals with disabilities. Over 57 children with disabilities and more than 100 adults with disabilities were injected with plutonium against their will. We're now at our fifth and halfway mark with the drug tests. Over the years, the government has sponsored a number of drug tests to see the effects that they have on humans. One involved a professional tennis player, Harold Blower. In 1952, he died after being injected with a fatal dose of a hallucinogenic drug. The US Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, and the New York State Attorney General all worked together to conceal evidence of its involvement in this experiment. They did so for 23 years. They all denied having any part of this. They were like, oh, the army was injecting him with drugs? We had nothing to do with that. We didn't know. Yeah, right. In our fourth spot, we have LSD. Dr. Frank Olson was an American bacteriologist and biological warfare scientist that worked for the Army and CIA. On November 28, 1953, Frank died after falling out of a hotel in Pennsylvania. His death is quite controversial because we don't know what truly happened, but there are a lot of theories out there. So apparently on November 19th, Olson was given LSD without his knowledge or consent. Then, just days later, he plummeted to his death. Many believe that the government had something to do with this. Either they were drugging him constantly and he became so delusional that he took his own life, or he was in too deep. Apparently, days before his death, he attempted to resign. He even told his wife that he made a terrible mistake, and then he mysteriously died. Suspicious, don't you think? In our third spot, we have mental health experiments. Dr. Robert Heath is quite the controversial figure in history, and that's due to the number of tests that he did on patients with schizophrenia. In the studies funded by the US Army, he would dose the patients with LSD before implanting electrodes into their brain and shocking them. He thought that this would cure all their problems. He also would use this on gay men to try and make them straight. In our second spot, we have the monster experiment. In 1939, psychologist Wendell Johnson and his student Mary Tudor conducted something known as the monster experiment. For this, they used 22 young orphans. Now, the study was all about stuttering. They wanted to see if psychological abuse could induce stuttering in children. And turns out, it did. So for this test, they divided the orphans into two groups. One group, the children were praised and treated humanely. In the other group, they were treated the complete opposite. In the end, the children in the negative group developed stutters that they retained for the rest of their lives. And in our number one spot today, we have the mustard gas experiments. In the early part of World War II, it was feared that Germany was going to turn to chemical warfare. So the US Army wanted to be prepared. One way that they prepared was by studying the effects of mustard gas. So they gathered a number of healthy young men who volunteered. However, had they known what they were going to go through, chances are they wouldn't have volunteered. 1,200 volunteers were tested in small teams for several weeks. They were ordered to strip to the waist and then were sent into a chamber and doused with mustard gas. According to one survivor, and I quote, "All of the men began writhing around and screaming in pain as the chemical burned through their skin. Some pounded on the walls and demanded to be let out, though the doors were locked and only opened when the time was up." Now, mustard gas causes nasty, nasty burns to the skin, and it can also cause uncontrollable bleeding in the lungs if it's inhaled. Now, the men did receive treatment after the experiments, but they were threatened. They said that if they told anyone about these experiments, then they were going to be sent to military prison. Alright guys, that's all for today's video. If you want to see part 3 to this video, then let me know in the comments below, and you gotta smash that like button for me. And now, speaking of comments, let's move on to our comment shout out portion. I'll be shouting out comments from the video top 10 Simpsons predictions that we will see in 2022. Hopefully we don't, because that video was depressing. Marcus Sanders commented, "Hey Lindsay, I love your outfits and great job on these videos." Thank you so much. Thank you. I really do appreciate it, okay? Rust Bucket, love that name, commented, "WTF is NFTs? I completely lost here." I'm not gonna try and explain NFTs because I still don't know. I don't understand. I mean, I kind of do. And then people are making millions off of it and I'm like, man, I chose the wrong career path. I should just make like cow emojis with different outfits and sell it. I don't know. And MW commented, "The Simpsons are the kings of predictions." Yeah. It's a little freaky at this point. Like, can you stop? What's gonna happen when the series is over? We're just gonna all die? I don't know. Alright guys, that's all the comments I'm shouting out for today's video. Make sure to comment something down below for a chance to be featured in my next comment shout out. And as always, don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to Most Amazing Top 10 for more amazing videos. I've been your host, Lindsay Ivan, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.